Good afternoon. I'm Sharon Tisher, and I'm very happy to welcome you to MOFGA's Public Policy Teach-In, all about climate change and Maine. This is actually the 16th public policy teach-in that we've put on as a MOFGA event focusing on an environmental issue of concern to Mainers and MOFGA members and MOFGA farmers. And I want to acknowledge that this wonderful event was the brainchild of our previous executive director, Nancy Ross, who is now a professor at Unity College. And I'm talking about these 16 years because I realized that in all of these years, this is the first time that we have talked about climate. Why climate? Why now? Well, the short answer is because my co-coordinator, B.D. Parker, said that we should. And B.D. Parker is an icon at MOFGA, and when she says we should do something, we do it. The longer answer is that when we looked around what was happening in the world, internationally, at the United Nations, and in Washington, we saw way too much inertia, fear, and confusion on this issue. And we thought that Mother Nature needed a little help from her many, many friends that come to the Common Ground Fair to help focus everyone's attentions and actions on this very most serious, I think, most formidable, most complex, and most serious of environmental problems that we face in the world today. We have 5 distinguished panelists. I will introduce them to you now briefly. They will each have 10 minutes to speak on their topic, and then we will open it up for half an hour of discussion, questions, and we will free you in time to make the 3:30, 3:50 big photo op on the Common, where you will get your picture put on the internet with thousands of other people on climate change if you choose to do that. So let me introduce our panelists in the order that they will speak. First is Dr. Stephen Mulkey, who I'm very pleased to welcome here to Unity and to Maine. Dr. Mulkey is the new president of Unity College. He's a forest ecologist, and he recently moved from Florida, where he headed a task force on the impacts of climate change in Florida. And we've asked him to focus on the latest developments on the science. What do we know, and why should we be concerned about it? Next we have John Jemison, scientist from the Maine Cooperative Extension, also a past board member of MOFGA, who is going to talk about implications for Maine agriculture and the Cooperative Extension's work on this issue and what he's hearing from Maine farmers about this issue. Then we will have someone who needs no introduction. At least you will recognize his voice, and if you watch TV, his face. Maine's beloved Lou McNally, who is MPBN broadcast meteorologist, and also received a Ph.D. in interdisciplinary studies from my institution, UMaine's Climate Change Institute.
Go Black Bears!
Yes! And Lou does many things in many different places simultaneously. He is supposed to be in Florida right now. He's a professor in Florida of applied meteorology for Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. But he also does our weather at the same time. Go figure. Okay, then we have Dylan Voorhees to Lou's left. And Dylan is the Clean Energy Project Director of the Natural Resources Council of Maine. And I've asked Dylan to focus on what Maine's plans have been to deal with climate change and how we've stacked up to those plans. What obstacles and concerns have confronted policymaking in Maine on dealing with climate change. And finally, we have Andy Burt, who is citizen activist par excellence, community organizer for Maine Partners for Cool Communities and Eat Local Foods Coalition, among other very important ventures. And she will talk about what individuals can do right now here in Maine to address this issue. So, without further ado, I'll turn the mic over to Dr. Stephen Mulkey from Unity College.
Thank you, folks. It is a privilege and an honor to be here. I've loved everything I've seen about Maine and Unity since I've arrived. This is a great place. It's arguably one of the best places to live on the planet Earth. One of the things to say about my background is I've mainly been concerned with photosynthesis and therefore gas exchange between the forest environment and the atmosphere. I've been very interested in how tropical forests would impact the global climate over time, and I've followed closely and worked in the science that's germane to that in Central America and in Brazil. So this is something that's been part of my portfolio for well over 20 years, and it's really important to understand the science, I think. I think the science is often minimized or lost in translation, and I think it's really crucial that we be able to speak clearly about the science. One of the things that I'm struck by is that never before in my knowledge of the history of science have I ever seen a topic that was so well understood and embraced by the scientific community, yet so poorly represented and misunderstood by the public. The divide is enormous. A recent paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy, just to give you an idea of this consensus on this, a recent paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy showed that 97% of practicing climate scientists have basically signed off on the fundamental tenets of anthropogenic or human-caused climate change. Essentially, every National Academy of Science in the world has signed off on this concept and the urgency of addressing it. There are no dissenting National Academies. And so that gives you an idea of the power of where we stand in terms of our understanding. What do we understand? Well, fundamentally we understand that greenhouse gases are re-radiating infrared radiation into the atmosphere. They're energizing the atmosphere. We have more heat aloft, we have more energy in the system. I'm actually going to defer to the meteorologist to talk more about that because that's his area. But I will say that a lot of the projections of the climate models they suggest that we're going to see many of the same weather events, extreme weather events that we're currently seeing. Is it proper to say that any one of those events is due to human-caused climate change? As a scientist, I won't say that. But it is consistent with exactly what is projected to occur. By the same token, I would not say that my Uncle Troy, that the 2 packs of Camel non-filter that he smoked every day caused his lung cancer. But I will say that statistically, if you smoke 2 packs of Camel non-filters, you're probably going to have a higher probability of getting lung cancer. I would say the same thing about the extreme weather that we've been seeing. If we look at the trajectory of the emissions that we currently have, there's a recent report that was just issued by the European Commission last week that showed that there was some good news. Europe in general is on target to meet the Kyoto Protocol. The bad news in that is the Kyoto Protocol is too weak to do much good. The further bad news in that report is that our emissions have increased worldwide dramatically, mainly owing to the activities of China and India. There's an argument to be made that through our consuming, we are exporting our emissions to China and India, mainly China, at this point in time. So there's much to think about there in terms of policy. And if we're talking about policy, then we get down to the nitty-gritty of terms of what we do. But when I look at the emissions trajectory, it is reasonable, and I accept as likely that if we do not change, that on our given business as usual trajectory, we will achieve a 4 degrees centigrade increase globally by sometime around 2080 and beyond. So the time scale for me is decadal, and it expands out to about 2100. I said 3 years ago that we were going to have a meter of sea level rise when I was serving as science advisor to the state of Florida. I still stand by that. In fact, I think it's going to be beyond that by 2100. A meter is a non-trivial amount of sea level rise. Most of Miami-Dade County would be gone. So what do we do about that? Well, that's a gnarly question if you'll think about it. So what is a 4 degree centigrade planet? What is that like? Well, we have never experienced that level of temperature in our evolutionary history. It just has not been part of our experience. It certainly hasn't been part of our experience since the development of civilization. So we're going to be facing some extreme challenges. The long term, over 200-300 years, implications of that is the drawdown of that CO2 could take up to 1,000 years. In other words, to get it back to a lower level could take up to 1,000 years. The imperative is that we don't go there. By avoiding going there now, we avoid the difficulty of drawing that CO2 down and the methane down. Right now we're seeing evidence, some of the best studies I've seen suggest that the tundra will start to become a net emitter of carbon dioxide, and certainly methane will follow from the melting permafrost by 2020. That's 9 years from now. The early 2020s is when we expect that positive feedback on the warming of the climate to kick in. That would be, in my opinion, as a scientist, that would be disastrous. We also, one of the benchmarks that I use is when on our current trajectory of emissions would we achieve a doubling of carbon dioxide relative to pre-industrial conditions. Pre-industrial conditions, let's say, were 280 parts per million. That's the generally agreed on value. Right now, we are at 393 parts per million. To give you an idea how fast that's changed, I calibrated my first infrared gas analyzer using the ambient concentration of 328 parts per million in 1980. So we're talking about 1, 2, 3% a year increase in CO2 emissions. The metaphor that's been used has been the bathtub. Think about it this way. We've got a bathtub and we filled it up about halfway and we open the drain at the same rate that the water is flowing in. The water is greenhouse gases. Okay, well let's take just a fraction of a soda straw, maybe a quarter of a soda straw, and let's add to that stream. It's not hard to see that after 100 years, after 200 years, you have a bathtub that's overflowing. And that in fact is what we're seeing in terms of our overall emissions profile. There's an argument out there that CO2, that the atmosphere is not all that sensitive to forcing from CO2. There's very few scientists that agree with that, but there are a couple of card-carrying climatologists that will tell you that it's only of a minor importance, maybe a degree centigrade by the end of the century. I will go on record as saying they're wrong. I don't know where you stand, but I think they're very wrong. And my basis for saying that is the paleoclimate data. If we go back in time to prehistory, and we look at the times when we know that climate has changed in response to greenhouse gas forcing in the past, that greenhouse gas came about naturally. It came from natural occurrence, natural events. We know that relative to a doubling of pre-industrial CO2, we can expect a 3 degrees centigrade overall average increase on the planet. Now, 3 degrees centigrade average means that in Fairbanks, Alaska, we're in double digits. And let me remind you that degrees centigrade is much more than a degree Fahrenheit. So it's many degrees Fahrenheit that we're talking about. And so the impact of that is, I wouldn't say it's non-trivial, I would say it's huge. Most important, I think it's fair to say our situation is desperate. We are out of time. We need to act now. We need to peak at 2020 and then decrease. Let me say very quickly a little bit about the role of higher education. I challenge every university and college president to speak out. If every national academy on the planet is not cover enough for you, what would be? You know, I feel like we need to take a stand on this, and the stand need not be political, it needs to be scientific. We don't have to drift into politics to make that stand. The science is very clear, it's very compelling, and the scientific community is very much signed off on it. Unity College, we're building sustainability science into our curriculum as part of our answer. Thanks for listening.
John Jemison from the University of Maine Cooperative Extension.
Good afternoon. Quite a sound system, isn't it? Excellent. It's a real pleasure to be here. I've had the privilege to work for Cooperative Extension and to work with our farming community for now over 20 years. I don't quite know where they all went, but it has been that long. And I work in the area of water quality and soil science. And so one of the things that's been one of my focuses since I started was how do we get farmers to adopt practices that will minimize their impact on the environment and have them be successful. And so it's been a great opportunity to do this. I also do a little bit of teaching at the university, and we bring in some of this climate change into our conversations about food systems. And I do some research with farmers looking at cropping systems and other such measures. And about a year and a half ago, I had the opportunity to apply for a Board of Trustees professorship position at the university, and they fund one of these a year to a project that they deem would have value to the state. And what I proposed to them was to go out and do an assessment of Maine agriculture and talk with young farmers, or try to skew it to young farmers. We didn't actually always have it skewed to young farmers. We had kind of a balanced mix, really. But wanted to ask them things like, what are you optimistic about with Maine agriculture? What are you pessimistic about Maine agriculture? What kinds of practices do you think the state should do to help promote Maine agriculture? And these kinds of questions. And one of the questions we asked them, germane to this topic, was, how have recent weather patterns affected your farm operations? And what changes are you anticipating making on your farm in the future? And we held 15 focus group sessions across the state, from actually some even out of state, going down in Portsmouth, from all the way from Portsmouth, New Hampshire up to Presque Isle. And we talked with 180 farmers or farm advisors about their opinions on these issues. And we taped all of their conversations and we transcribed them. And now I'm in the process of trying to go through all of this information and see what they said. And I thought it would be kind of interesting to this group to have you all hear their voices of what, and I tried to classify them into different kinds of areas. And I thought it would be kind of entertaining to look at just a few of those. And for example, I put one under, one of my sort of areas was like, they get it, it's climate variability, not necessarily global warming. And one of my farmers that we talked with had this to say. He says, what it seems to me is that what's happening isn't the trend isn't a trend anymore, it's just totally unpredictable. Or we're increasing towards unpredictability. And I think that's consistent with the scientific models that are predicting climate change. But I think for most people, the best hedge against unpredictability is diversity. And if I have one message to bring to you all today, as farmers and farmers thinking about the future, the more we can diversify our operations, the better off I think we're going to be in an uncertain climate environment. But I thought that was a particularly interesting comment. And we talked with apple growers, and apple growers were particularly concerned about climate change. And if you think about it kind of intuitively, it's pretty obvious why they are. And one of our farmers said, the problem with weather and growing food is that the climate in which we grow food in is there's a very narrow window of stability. And I mean, if we get outside that window very far, everything falls apart. So yeah, I think it's a real concern. And then we had it said there's still a lot of resistance to the concept of climate change, but there's a lot of people who think it's a hoax, you know. But I'm concerned about it. I'm concerned about Macintosh requiring a very specific weather, and if that weather changes, our major crop is going to be dramatically affected. So there really is a lot of concern out there. And so another example from the mixed session that I thought was pretty interesting. He said, it makes you wonder what the future is going to bring in terms of new weather patterns, new diseases, and new insects. It's just interesting when you can actually see it happening on your farm. When I first moved to Maine, there were no Japanese beetles in central Maine. And then a couple of examples of farmer certainty that they see climate change happening. This was an apple grower who actually was recording his his spray patterns in his field. And he said, I have reason to believe that my spray records for past the, say 20 years or so, my the average over the first 5 years, the first date of spray of each season was anywhere between the 1st and the 5th of May. I live in Bridgeton and to the south of here, and over the past 5 years, it's been the 25th to the 27th of April, and each spray I've written down the stage of development. So I took that into account. And even if we shifted it a couple of days, we are still talking either a 10 or 7 day earlier spray application. There's no denying that if I spread these things out on the table and someone would see at least a 5 day, and that was the date I wrote down in each book, in the book. I'm not saying it was that, but I went back and actually verified it. There's no denying it. There's now at least a 5 to 10 day earlier need to get out in the field, and I mean, that's telling you something about the climate. I've got a couple more minutes here. An interesting blueberry grower said, I do believe global warming is going to have a very severe effect on our blueberry industry, even with irrigation, because the heat in August has become so intense that the berries literally cook within hours in the field. And it's interesting, we talked to some groups, some beef producers. The beef producers were a pretty interesting group. They were really sort of seeing that what they were doing about taking potato land and putting it to sod and growing and running animals on that was a way to sequester carbon in their system, and that is absolutely correct. It was just interesting that we never really talked much about the methane component of the animals in the situation, but I still think we will always need animals in our farming operations because they are fantastic converters of cellulose to protein, and they produce a wonderful byproduct that makes things grow really well. The other thing that I really heard farmers say was that, farmers take a lot on their back. They just kind of deal with things, and I hope I can. Maybe I shouldn't say this one, but I'll skip this one. All right, an apple grower says, Mother Nature's a bitch. Deal with it. Another example of farmers putting the troubles on their back. They say, we make changes all the time to adapt to the situation. I mean, to try to anticipate this next year is going to be like it was last year is just a waste of time. In the end, I've got to have a crop and I've got to feed my cows, and I'm not trying to anticipate that next year I'm going to be able to be in the field on the 15th. I'm going to be ready on the 15th, but if it doesn't work, I'll get there anyway. And so a lot of the farmers just are going to try to take what comes, and they don't really think they can have a whole lot of control in it. And then, as you might imagine, we had a number of farmers that were just sort of kind of denying that it happens, and some were actually enthusiastic about the idea. And if you were a dairy farmer and had to go out all the time in really, really cold weather, maybe you too would pray every day for global warming. So these are some of the examples. A lot of our farmers now are putting in things like irrigation, drainage, and these sorts of things on their farm. Many of them are, interestingly, we have lowered our days on some of our maturities, corn varieties that is, then we're looking to some double cropping systems, and the things we're trying to do to improve the quality of our land, we're not necessarily doing it driven by the weather. So there are a lot of things we can be doing, and I'll just wrap up my comments by saying that, our goal at the university is to try to provide people with research-based information, and we have been doing some programming in this area. I think we're going to be doing more programming in this area. From a public policy perspective, I think as we move to the future, one of the things we really need to do is to try to help farmers be able to make these investments, to be able to do double cropping on their farms, or when they make these efforts to protect the soil, when we get this more increasingly variable climate, that we won't have our resource end up in the Bay of Fundy, like Russ was saying earlier today. So that was really fun to share some of the voices of some of our farmers from this winter. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was great. An earlier talk today, Lou was talking also about the importance of diversifying and being prepared to change crops, but it just sort of dawned on me in your talk that when your crop is a tree, that's pretty difficult. So I was so excited to introduce Lou that I didn't tell you what he was going to be talking about. And what we have asked him to focus on is how should scientists cope with the perfect storm of climate change policy and its economic, political, and social context. So how do scientists deal with the politics?
Thanks, Sharon. And hi, everybody. Good to be here. The last time I did a talk at the Common Ground Country Fair, we were in Litchfield before the other place. Anyway, it's great to be here along with such esteemed company. Glad to have a chance to meet some of these folks. I spoke on the same topic back then, and I think I had 20 or 30 people. So at least it's refreshing to see that I was in the right direction back then anyway. So I've been asked to talk about how the scientists cope with everything. I'm pretty lucky. I can wear a lot of hats. That's one of the things that an interdisciplinary degree and education gets you. I've got quite a bit of experience, of course, in the media, but I'm also a paleoclimatologist. So I can wear a lot of hats, and I can see a lot of the connections that are going on out there. And I'm also supposed to be mentioning something to you about what is behind climate denial and what needs to be done about it. I may take that first. We know what's behind climate denial. That's a no-brainer. It's taken a number of Freedom of Information Act requests, but we know what's behind it. I don't have to tell you or name names. I do know that we're talking on the order of tens of millions of dollars a year going to some number of dozen aptly named organizations, which makes the general public think that there's some kind of consensus on the other side. We know for a fact that there is a strategy house in Washington, D.C., which is advising a certain party's candidates this year to make sure they make it a debate. Make it a debate. Well, I got news for you, folks. There is no debate. As Dr. Mulkey mentioned, it's 97 or 98% of us know what's going on and are going to basically deal with it. There's nothing else that can be done. So what do you do to address it? Well, as I was mentioning in the talk I was giving earlier, it's very, very simple, all right? You let those people go argue it. You let them go into another room and polarize themselves. We have work to do. We have real work to do. And here in Maine, it's a little different than in other places in New England, but nevertheless, we have got to be prepared to make changes in the mix of our crops and things of that nature. So start keeping track of your growing degree days and you'll be fine. It's an interesting point too. I get to, I hope I'm not stealing too much thunder here, but I get to talk about higher education too because I'm involved in that. And I think what we need to be thinking about, I think it's a great idea the college presidents speak out, but I think you might get 4 of them, you know. I think what we need to be doing is we need to be including in the curriculum a basic track in meteorology, even if it's just a survey course, and a basic track in climatology, which is a different approach to the science, just so people have the basis to be able to talk in an educated manner about what's going on. And that's not tough to do, that's 6 credits. I'll write you a little proposal. Not a problem. But in terms of how controversial it is, I really got to tell you that based on what I've seen and what I know already, the media themselves are pretty much complicit in the problem. And the reason for that is kind of interesting. What's going on in the last 10 or 15 years, in addition to getting rid of all of the really good-looking older people and hiring really good-looking, cheap, younger people, is that they've changed their focus in terms of the journalism itself. People used to go out and enterprise stories. They used to go find information, and they used to find additional sources to confirm it, and they used to write and produce it. Now, because of the way it operates, an executive producer or an assignment manager will just sit there and basically go through the pile of pre-produced HD video press releases from whomever, pick it out, and broadcast it. They don't have to even work anymore. So all of these places that are producing whatever they want for information are getting heard because the media says, well, I got this and here's the other side. Let's present both sides, thinking that they're being journalistically proper. All they're doing is perpetuating the myth that there is actually a debate. There really is no debate. So what does that mean for us? What's going to happen? Well, there's activists that say we have to get corporate adaptation. We have to get the companies to do this. Well, let me tell you something. Here's a little story. Way back, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago or something, we were just getting started on a TV show called Made in Maine, which ran for quite a long time. And one of the first places that we went to was a paper mill down in Westbrook. You all know the one I mean. And I don't remember if it was owned by the people that own it now or the previous owners. But nevertheless, we went and interviewed this guy. He was the CEO of the plant because he had been getting swamped with environmental awards. One of his engineers figured out a way of closing the loop on the paper-making process for one of their particular machines. That saved them money. The corporate officer, this is a no-brainer. If we do this, we make more dough, do it. He had no clue what the environmental or ecological impact was going to be. And then all of a sudden they start rolling in. Here come the awards from this place, from that place, from the other place. This guy, when I asked him about it, deer in the headlights. No kid, he had no idea how come he was getting all this good press. It's as simple as that. We've got a marvelous educational system here. My daughter took a degree in engineering physics at the University of Maine. Come on, we've got people that can figure this out. It's a backdoor approach, I know, and it's not as really cool activist, I know, and it's not going to get you the publicity that some people think they need, I know. But if you convince these people that if they make this change to their facility, this change to their process, which just happens to help lower the emissions, they're not going to care. If it makes them a buck, they'll do it. So all you're going to do is figure out how to have these people make a buck. And at the same time, they're not going to care about reducing emissions. We will. And we'll get it done, and they won't even know they're doing it. And as far as actually having the corporations themselves do something about that, I got good news. I got real good news. I mentioned briefly that some people think that this is all a hoax, this climate change. This is such an Americo-centric view, it's ridiculous. Some people say it's all liberals. That is such an Americo-centric view, it's ridiculous. You get outside our borders, even to Central America, they don't care liberal, conservative. They don't care squat about that kind of thing. All they care about is that it's changing, they know it, and we have to do something about it. Well, there are other people paying attention. A lot of you may know that there's this thing out there called the reinsurance industry. Some of you may not, but it's big. I mean, I lived in Bermuda for 4 years. It's big. You got an outfit, say, like United Airlines, and they can go to Geico and say, I want you to insure my airplanes. Geico's not big enough. They might be able to insure 2 or 3 planes, but they can't insure a fleet. So what they do is they have a company above them that insures them called Geico Reinsurance. And there's Montpelier Re and Swiss Re and Munich Re, and they're all over the place. What they'll do, Geico will say, okay, we're going to take on the risk of all of your airplanes. Then they go to a buddy of theirs who's actually insuring an oil field. Once again, the lower company that we might know about might be able to insure 1 rig, but they can't insure the entire field. So that company says, okay, I'll take that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap the risk off. You take 1/3 of my airplanes, I'll give you 1/3 of my oil rigs. Now we got to find somebody who's doing railroads and get the other third taken off. It's called laying off risk. It's done in a syndicate. They've been doing it since Lloyd's of London in the 1750s. These guys are global. These guys are paying attention. There's a quote from Munich Reinsurance saying that there's 2 times the extreme weather events now since 1980. That's a 100% increase. We know that if we get more observations, if we get more stations, if we get more information, that we can generally see somewhere around a 15% increase in the accuracy of what we're getting for the data. This is a 100% increase. These guys are paying attention. I don't think it's going to be very long at all before these corporations, who aren't getting a kick in the pants from underneath, or sideways, as I'm suggesting, they're going to get it from the top. Their insurance company is going to say, bye. And they are going to evaporate. So there's good news everywhere. We'll talk more.
Now that we have all your attention, I should mention that there are MOFGA postcards to go to Senator Snow and Collins, which should be sort of circulating. And if you want to save the postage, by all means return them to Heather Spalding there, and we will see that they get those. But they relate to climate change and other ag policy issues, and so we hope that you can just sign those and return them to Heather Spalding. Now, turning now to Dylan Voorhees. 11 years ago, the State Planning Office, which I think was more or less abolished last year, is that right? On its way out, University of Maine and the Climate Change Task Force got together and developed a climate action plan. And I remember working with Andy on that. It noted that Maine's per capita greenhouse gas emissions are larger than every other New England state, and that the percentage of emissions from transportation in Maine, because it's such a big state probably, is well above the national average. So it developed a variety of strategies with a goal to reduce CO2 emissions below 1990 levels by basically now. So I'm asking Dylan to focus his remarks on what's happened with Maine policy since then, and how well are we doing, and what the obstacles are to working the problem in Maine.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm going to tell you the 3 things I'm going to talk about specifically, and see if I can get through all 3 of them. The first is why we matter, because one of the biggest challenges is thinking that this is somebody else's problem. So we need to start there with why it matters, why we matter, why Maine matters. The second, what we've done so far, how's it been going, and what are we seeing in terms of global warming emissions in Maine. And the third is, what do we need to do going forward? So why we matter is really important, and I think there's a lot of different ways to answer that question. The fact is that we all matter. We are all part of this problem, and just as we can all be part of the solution. I think pretty much everyone in this room wouldn't really think it was acceptable to throw a bottle out your car window and have it land on the side of the road. Now, you would understand that that's a problem, not because your single bottle on the side of the road is going to change that much of anything. But collectively, each of us throwing bottles out the window on the side of the road all the time leads to a big problem. And that is in fact what's going on with global warming. Each one of us is responsible for many tons of emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Every human on the planet, from the United States and Maine to China. So we're all part of that, and we need to come to terms with that. It shouldn't ride us with guilt. It should be an ownership of the problem. Some of you may have a handout that I handed around with a couple of pieces of information. I'm sure I didn't have enough for everyone. You can share and look on if you want. That gives you some basic information about Maine's greenhouse gas emissions and where they come from. And one of the things that you can notice in that is over the last 20 years or so, certain sectors of Maine's economy have actually seen their reductions in emissions, and others have gone up. In fact, if you look at the chart with a lot of squiggly lines on it in the middle of this, you can see that the industrial sector in Maine has actually gone down pretty significantly since 1990. Now, that's not to say the industry in Maine doesn't have more to do. The sectors that have gone up are transportation, that's our cars and trucks, and the residential sector. And that largely is about our homes and how we heat them. We're going up. The regular people, in this tent in Maine, our homes, our cars and trucks, we're the ones that, in terms of Maine, are driving the curve up. And so we really have to own our own responsibility. And of course, one of the things that's important in terms of why we matter is an ethical and moral component. And the fact of the matter is that we are absolutely, no question, relatively wealthy in the world. And so all of us share in this challenge. We have the wherewithal to make the changes that are needed. And we have the wherewithal to protect ourselves against the worst impacts. And that's clearly not the case with a lot of the rest of the world that doesn't have the wherewithal to make the changes that are needed, and they're much more vulnerable to the devastating impacts of climate change. And so there's clearly an ethical component of that. What we've done, we've actually done a lot of good things over the last 10 years or so in the state of Maine, and Sharon mentioned that we've set goals for reducing emissions, and that's very important. In fact, all of the New England states have the same goals for reducing emissions, and the first of those goals was to get back to 1990 levels of emissions by 2010. And in Maine, it actually looks like, the data's still coming in, it actually looks like we may have attained that. And I've got some charts in there that show you where we're doing, and especially since the early 2000s, when emissions in Maine were very high, we've actually come down a significant amount. And so that's a very good indication. One of the charts I've showed you on the middle of the other page is a chart that shows our emissions going down over the last several years, and our GDP, our economy, going up. Now, obviously our GDP has suffered a little bit in the last couple of years, and this data probably goes to 2008. But it is very clear that it is very possible, in fact, it happened over the last several years, to grow our economy while shrinking our emissions. And that is really one of the fundamental barriers to doing more, is understanding that doing something about this problem does not have to hurt our economy, in fact, quite the opposite. So we've done a lot of things in Maine. We've got a lot of different pieces of policy. We have renewable energy policies. We have energy efficiency policies. We've had some progress in terms of federal policies like fuel economy standards for our cars and trucks. Those are a couple of pieces that are mattering. We're seeing switching in where our power comes from oil to natural gas. Now, natural gas is still a very large contributor of global warming pollution from power plants, and we need to address that. It's clearly in the right direction to switch from oil to natural gas. That's what industry in Maine has done to some extent, and why their emissions are down. On the pro side, why has Maine been generally on a good track in terms of clean energy policy? A couple of reasons. And I spent a lot of my time in Augusta in the State House working with policymakers. Renewable energy is something Maine people understand. They get it. We've been using the woods, the water, for a long time. We need to use other renewable sources, the sun, the wind, the tides. We need to do a good job of harnessing those renewable energy resources in sustainable ways. And that means getting biomass right and forestry. It means getting wind power right. It means doing those things well, but it means doing more renewable energy to displace fossil fuels. And Maine people get that we have an abundance of energy sources around us that are sustainable. Another thing is that we are close to the environment, and people in Maine, and including your representatives that I interact with regularly in Augusta, they understand that there's a relationship between our economy and the environment. And that's really important for climate change. Climate change is not merely an environmental problem. It impacts every aspect of our lives, our society, and our economies, from the coasts and our lobstering to tourism to the forest sector to agriculture and our infrastructure. It impacts all of those. And so in understanding that we are in fact connected to the environment and depend on it economically, which we do so much of in Maine, is, I think, a good thing. On the other side of the equation, some of the reasons we haven't made more progress are that there are very much entrenched interests, and Lou spoke a little bit about that, that don't want to see change happen. Those are folks that have an economic interest in keeping us using fossil fuels. And fossil fuels represent where 90 to 95% of emissions come from in this country in Maine. And those interests don't want us to change, and that's not surprising. It doesn't actually, as much as we'd like to think, mean that they're evil. It means they're going to spend a lot of money to get what they want, and that's true in Maine too. It's definitely true in Washington, but it's true in Maine too. And over the last couple of years, I've definitely observed not just the Maine folks that want to see the status quo, but the national folks having a greater influence in Augusta. The American Petroleum Institute, the Americans for Prosperity, funded by billionaire fossil fuel moguls, the Koch brothers. They actually now are paying lobbyists, in the state of Maine. And so we see more national corporate interest at work. The good news is that the people of Maine have been able to push back on them when they get together. But those are some things that have been problematic and we need to continue to address. So third and last for now, what do we need to do? First thing is we need to stop the administration and folks in Augusta from rolling back the policies that we already have. And it's really important that all of us are aware that the policies that we've had over the last several years on renewable energy, on reducing global warming from power plants, on energy efficiency, are absolutely under attack by the current administration and their allies. They have, in the last legislative session, they will be in the next legislative session. So we need to stop that, and we need to continue the progress that we made, not go backwards. And so part of that is that all of us need to take action. NRCM is an environmental advocacy group. I hope you'll look us up. I hope you'll join with us and our colleagues in being an active advocate. We need to do a lot of different things. I'll just touch on two of them that I think are really important. The first is energy efficiency. Energy efficiency, doing the things that we need to do to light our homes, our factories, to run our machines, doing that with less energy is absolutely the first priority for us to reduce our emissions. And doing that is in our interest for lots of different reasons, because it saves us money. Putting insulation in your attic will reduce your footprint at home, and it'll save you money. And doing that across the board needs to be our top priority, and we need the policies that support that. Many of you may have heard about Efficiency Maine, which is a group, a statewide independent organization that has programs to help people with energy efficiency, businesses, homeowners. We need to provide the support to them to help us become more energy efficient. Another example of a policy that we need and are working on in Augusta and in Maine and in other states is a clean fuel standard. A standard for the fuels that we use in our cars and trucks to reduce the amount of pollution content in our fuels. And we need a standard that's actually going to have an impact. Not ethanol from corn out in the Midwest, which is a boondoggle, but actual real fuels, whether it's electricity or real biofuels that are going to help getting that into our fuel system and stopping the worst. Many of you heard about tar sands and the oil coming out of Alberta, which is really the dirtiest fuel imaginable that we could get into our cars and trucks. Well, they would love to sell that to us, and that is the most carbon intensive fuel that we could put into our cars and trucks. So we need policies like a clean fuel standard to stop us from going in the wrong direction and really start us going in the right direction. So I'll stop there. There are absolutely lots of real solutions that we can have on our individual homes and at the policy level in Washington and in the state of Maine. Hope we can talk a little bit more about this. Thank you.
Final speaker, in addition to working with NRCM and 350.org and working for better policies both in Augusta and Washington, Andy Burt is going to talk about other ways that people can make a difference.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be on this panel today, and I hope that for me, one of the exciting things in this work is that I get to be out there meeting with people and organizing people to go up to Augusta and help folks like Dylan get public policy through, because we have a citizen legislature, and if they see that this is what the people really want, I think that we can make a difference. I'm going to talk about two programs. I could go on forever about the things that are happening in our state that around climate change, adaptation and mitigation, projects that are happening in communities, and around food. I'm going to talk about two that I'm particularly close to. One is called the Green Sneakers Project, and the other is the Eat Local Foods Coalition, and particularly my role having worked in that with the Maine Council of Churches. The Green Sneakers Project is a new project of a group called Maine Partners for Cool Communities. We came together, the Sierra Club, Physicians for Social Responsibility, and the Maine Council of Churches, kind of an odd group to come together, but we really represent a broad section of the community. And we started working on climate change solutions, community by community. We've organized cool communities in 26 Maine towns, working to have local climate action plans and real timetables and activities with citizen activists and staff. We also helped to spur a statewide project called Clean Air Zones, No Idling campaign. This started in schools, it spread throughout the communities, and actually was adopted by our DOT to have approaches to our bridges and the turnpike park and rides are all no idling zones. So this is part of a whole campaign, and then we had legislation to say that trucks cannot idle in Maine for more than 5 minutes. Now there's not an idling police out there, much like if you ever try to make a citizen's arrest around littering, which I have to tell you I have tried to do. No one is interested. So, but the real thing is to get the education out and to make people aware of why it's important to do these things. Well, in 2009, after the talks in Copenhagen to renew the Kyoto Protocol and really set some new realistic targets for greenhouse gas emissions for the international community, and it went nowhere. A group of us, including Beattie Parker, got together informally and said, boy, it's time to get to the streets and go door to door and talk to people. Beattie said, I want to take the message door to door. I want to talk to my neighbors about what each of us can do to save energy and save the planet. And another one said, yeah, but we've got to make it fun and hopeful. And so we called it Green Sneakers with the motto, walking the talk. Yeah, walking the talk for smart energy solutions. We went out in the spring and fall of 2010 with 120 volunteers and went to 14 communities we talked to 2,000 Maine homeowners. Now, I know we have a population of over 1 million, but this begins to plant the seeds, which is really exciting. Well, at that time, the planets were lining up, and our former governor, Baldacci, was challenging us to weatherize every Maine home and business by 2030. This was bold goal that was going to give us energy independence and security. At the same time, Efficiency Maine was launching its home energy savings program that had generous financial incentives for homeowners to move forward with that goal. So we took that news out to door to our neighbors, and as I said, we reached about 2,014 communities. Since January, we've continued that work, and we've been doing a follow-up program in the Mid-Coast. This has involved everything from training people to do kitchen table talks with interested homeowners, getting them to look at their house through new set of eyes. It's looking at it with no one with a sales pitch, but with an interested fellow neighbor who happens to have been trained on building science. We have gone into 200 homes with that particular project. We're doing house parties with people who've already done an energy upgrade on their house, and they want to tell their neighbors what they've done. They want to have people come over, kick the tires, see what really is involved. This is all part of building a real movement in one community at a time, one neighborhood at a time. We created these lawn signs for people to put up so that they could actually let people know during Earth Day that they had taken action. So it was part of continuing to say our community is moving in the right direction. We've been working on public policy. A couple of years ago, we passed legislation called the Property Assessed Clean Energy Loan Fund and it needs to be adopted in every community. Efficiency Maine actually has funding to help homeowners upgrade their homes. And we've been doing community forums around the state and also helping local communities to figure out how to adopt a PACE loan program. We've mobilized our volunteers to help that happen. But I think one of the most important things, and I will conclude with this because it comes back to where we started about getting youth involved, is that we've been doing a program with high school students, what we call future homeowners and community leaders. This is the challenge for the next generation, is to solve climate change. We can be helpers in it, but giving them the tools and having them, empowering them to go and talk to their families as well and do the home walkthroughs. This is beginning to spread things through there in the community, and I need to stop.
Thank you to all of the panelists. I thought I knew a lot about this, but I had a lot to learn today. So now it's your time. Questions? Okay, I saw first. Speak up, please, because we don't.
I'm curious, and I'd like to say hi, Lou. I don't know if you remember Carmine Leo from Portland.
Right, good to see you.
Old days, good times. I'm curious if you, as thought leaders, would be interested in an adaptability project, a blueprint that would be scalable, that would help communities of any size deal with the rapid, chaotic, and extreme variability in type 2 climate change. Would that be of interest to you?
can you explain a little more what you're talking about?
Well, I would, but there's actually someone better here. Dr. Fuller is somewhere in here who has developed the Adaptability Project. He's a climate guy. You guys need to know who he is. So, just, that's an introduction. He could explain.
Do you want to say
more.
something?
How about if I send you an email?
Sure. Fine. Yeah.
But the rest of us want to know what that is.
Yeah.
So you'd probably want to work with the state planning office, which is, it's too bad that the administration is getting rid of that, because their main thing they do is help municipalities with exciting opportunities like that. And hopefully you don't need the state planning office to make this work.
Let me suggest that you go to their website, Alder, A-L-D-E-R, stone3.com. Alderstone3.com.
Alderstone? Alderstone3.com.
Yes.
Thank you. ALDERSTONE 3.com. Right? Now there's a question over here. Digit 3. Okay, question over here.
Hi. My name's Sasha. I go to Unity College. That's my president right there. I love wildlife, but most of all, I love the natural kind of saving the planet attitude that we all seem to have today. But I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of disappointed. We talk about renewable sources and stuff, and the ethics of our society, but we don't talk about the one thing that really helps us out and make money, and that's marijuana. So I know it's one of those stretches, and I'm pretty sure you guys lived through an era where the talk of marijuana has come and gone a dozen times, but I think you should add that into any scientific equation that you've thought about, because it's pretty profitable for everyone in the system. But I have some filming to do, and hope that you guys talk about marijuana and how it can help everybody.
So marijuana as a carbon sink.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
To add to what she's saying, I've read that hemp can absorb about, like 1 square acre hemp can absorb about 25 times the carbon as 1 square acre of like the number of trees that you plant. And
So 1 acre of tree or 1 acre of marijuana? I'd rather have 1 acre of marijuana.
All right, so Lou has a comment on that.
Yeah, the problem with that, it's a great sink, but if you smoke it, it goes right back in the atmosphere.
Any other questions? Yes.
I'd be curious, two of you, the agriculture and the natural resources, the transportation component, what is increasing? Is it tourism? Is it trucking? Is it commuting? Why is that showing the increase, and what, in terms of planning, can we be doing to look at our own uses?
I would like to just, I have one comment about the carbon related to transporting food versus local foods, and there's been a lot of interest in that whole discussion. Is there less carbon emitted if we grow food here locally and put it in a lot of little cars and run it up to a farmer's market and have a whole lot of little cars go over to the farmer's market and buy it and bring it back, versus whether it's cheaper to grow it someplace else and put it on a rail system and quickly move it someplace? And a lot of people get really caught up in that argument, and I think one of the things we got to keep in mind is that when we have local agriculture here, a strong local growing agriculture, and we know where the food is grown, and we know how it's being grown, that to me is really, really important, because if, at some point, if we don't have that structure here, even if people are saying it's cheaper and it's less CO2 intensive to move the food from California to here, I still argue that it's more important to have it here because it's locally produced, it's driving the local economy, and if the wheels come off the energy truck and we can't get it here, then we aren't going to be sitting out to lunch. And so I just thought I'd bring that discussion up because there's a lot of confusion around that whole issue. And that's just my own personal opinion on that.
But if you think now versus 10 years ago, think about when you go to the conventional supermarket, how many more foods are from really far away, and all of the transportation costs associated with that. Now, Dylan, do you have?
Just briefly about where emissions come from, and transportation is absolutely the largest source of Maine's CO2 emissions. You can look at these charts, and I mean it's almost half. I mean it's 45%. So it's enormous, and I can't tell you the exact breakdown in terms of residential or an individual versus business. I think that both have likely increased. I definitely know that the residential side of transportation, our cars and trucks to just drive people around, is absolutely gone up. And I would guess that's the largest chunk of that. And that's just us getting in our cars and driving more miles every year. That's gone up and up and up.